Hi everyone. Today we're looking at Lord's Day 42 of the Heidelberg Catechism. It goes like this. Question and answer 110. What does God forbid in the eighth commandment? God forbids not only outright theft and robbery punishable by law, but in God's sight, theft also includes all scheming and swindling in order to get our neighbor's goods for ourselves, whether by force or means that appear legitimate, such as inaccurate measurements of weight, size, or volume, fraudulent merchandising, counterfeit money, excessive interest, or any other means forbidden by God. In addition, God forbids all greed and pointless squandering of his gifts. Question and answer 111. What does God require of you in this commandment? That I do whatever I can for my neighbor's good, that I treat others as I would like them to treat me, and that I work faithfully so that I may share with those in need. So we continue the Heidelberg Catechism's treatment of the Ten Commandments. We've reached the eighth commandment, which is, thou shalt not steal. And as we've seen in the other commandments related to loving our neighbors as ourselves, the intent of this commandment is not just a prohibition against a narrow set of behaviors. It's also an invitation to a new kind of posture toward our neighbors, toward material possessions and wealth, and ultimately toward God. Really, the intent of the commandment is articulated at the end of the Lord's Day, where we're reminded the goal of the law is not just to confine us from bad behavior, but really to encourage positive behavior in the pursuit of loving God with our whole hearts and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so the prohibition against theft, as pointed out by the authors of the Catechism, also includes any intent to advance ourselves, material and economically, at the cost of our neighbors. So even innocuous things like overinflating the price of an item we're selling used while looking for the lowest possible price in an item that we're buying, something like that is really at a heart level a violation of the eighth commandment. And this is supported in our readings for the week, which really get at the heart of the commandment, which is really hearts that are content, so content with what God provides that we're willing to live our material life on God's terms rather than trying to manipulate and control it ourselves. So our first reading is Psalm 119, which is our ongoing lengthy celebration of God's law. And in Psalm 119, verses 127 and 128, we read, "Because I love your commands more than gold, more than pure gold, and because I consider all your precepts right, I hate every wrong path." And so here we get to the heart of this commandment and all commandments, and that is, because we value God's love over any material thing, we are willing to live our material and financial life in a way that in the immediate seems costly, but ultimately expresses that we are so satisfied with God that we don't need to advance ourselves economically by violating the intent of God's law. Next, we go to Leviticus 22, which is God's address to Moses, the leadership of Israel, as well as the priesthood of Israel regarding the treatment of offerings, where this might seem like a bit of a departure from talking about the prohibition against stealing, but it's really identifying ways in which we violate against that which we've offered to God. So it's really, again, the material offerings both of the Israelites and as the church as God's new people are really a way of us expressing that God's love is more important to us than our money. And so this is just a set of guidelines for how to treat the offering to God as sacred. This theme is brought out in Malachi chapter 3, where God confronts his people and he says, "You may think you are innocent of theft. You haven't actually gone out and robbed anybody, but by withholding your material offerings to me, you're robbing me." And so on one hand, God says, when I demand an offering from you, I'm really demanding that which is rightfully mine anyway. And so in withholding generosity to God and to our neighbor, we're actually stealing from God that which is rightfully God's. And this principle applies not just to the tithe, the mandated 10% donation to the Lord's house, but really every part of our lives, where we constantly have to remind ourselves it all belongs to God. And when we offer back to God, we're just offering him what we already owe him. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus confronts somebody who asks Jesus to judge between him and his brother over a matter of money. And here the essence of Jesus' response is, your relationship with your brother is more important than the inheritance. And by coming to me and asking me to rule in your favor so you can get the money, you're asking me to help you destroy a relationship that's worth far more than money. And this too, it's an invitation to us not to value money over our neighbor or over our relationship with God. And Jesus goes on to say, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And so the spirit in us that might lead us to steal is the same spirit that leads us to be more preoccupied than our economic advancement, than our relationship with our neighbor, or the needs of the vulnerable in the world around us. Finally, we look to 1 Timothy 6, in which, among other things, the Apostle Paul says, godliness with contentment is great gain. The two go hand in hand. When we have hearts that are truly consumed with the love of God, then we are so content that our primary motivation isn't personal advancement or material wealth. So that's the essence of the eighth commandment, and that is a summary of Lord's Day 42 of the Heidelberg Catechism. As always, keep studying and keep the faith.